Thank you for tuning in here to drywind.net, and just want to introduce Dr. L.A. Marzulli, who's a regular guest of ours, obviously, and he's the best-selling author of the Nephilim trilogy. He received an honorary doctorate from Pacific International University for his work on the biblical subject of the Nephilim. And his recent book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, further expands on his considerable research on how the paranormal phenomena, for example, such as UFOs, abduction phenomena, genetic manipulation, and other supernatural phenomena are looked at from a grounding of solid biblical prophecy. And Lynn came to know Jesus Christ after the disillusion and deception of New Age spiritualism. And you can purchase his book, subscribe to his newsletter, and read his blog. And by the way, the blog is excellent. And find a wealth of information on his website at spiraloflife.com. Since we last talked, there continues to be interesting things going on in the world. One of the things I noticed, Lynn, is kind of the uptick in interest in extraterrestrial life. I know that the Phoenix lander is on Mars, digging and baking the soil in hopes of finding hydrocarbons and elements of the water that might suggest life. And I understand that they're going to be doing some announcements here later this month. I'm not exactly sure what it's going to be, but it does show the interest for extraterrestrial life. So one of my questions, and we can take this however you want, but I wanted to deal with this one right off because I think it's timely in the news, is from my point of view in reading the Bible and having a relationship with Jesus Christ, I don't find anything threatening about them finding life on Mars. You know, what is your view on that?
Well, I agree. I mean, if they find life, no matter what that is, it doesn't change my relationship, my personal relationship with Jesus. I mean, without that, and I'm not talking religion here for viewers who have no idea what I'm talking about. I'm not talking about religion. I'm not talking about a system of rules or do's and don'ts. I'm not talking about that at all. I'm talking about a personal relationship with the creator of the universe, literally, which was available basically to everyone who asked for it right after Jesus died in the first century, and the apostles, of course, received that. Since then, it's been obfuscated for literally hundreds, if not almost 2 millennia, to the point where people have no idea, many people have no idea what it is. Going to church is not a personal relationship with Jesus. Talking about having your spirit being regenerated, some people call it born again. I don't necessarily, it's a fine, verbiage if you want to coin it that, but that personal relationship with the creative universe by which he communicates directly to me, either through his word, through mental impressions. Sometimes he'll give me a word like he did yesterday, which was kind of interesting. But if they find life on Mars, which I think they're going to, they'll find some sort of past life there and this, of course, will tie into the panspermia theory. If they do find that, it's not going to change anything for me, only because I have that personal relationship with them. Where I'm expecting this to go, of course, is what I mentioned a couple of sentences back, the whole idea of panspermia, the idea of that life was spewed throughout the universe, just exploded throughout the universe, and has evolved over aeons, over millennia, billions of years of time into different life forms. And there really is no God per se. And this is what I think the evolutionists will run up the flagpole, as it were. At the end of the movie with Ben Stein, where he's interviewing Richard Dawkins, he basically asks him point blank, he says, okay, where did life come from? And all Dawkins can come up with, if you haven't seen the movie, it's really worth seeing.
Seen it. It's excellent.
Great flick. It's like all Dawkins can come up with is, well, it must have happened, millions and billions of years ago in a galaxy far, far away. And Stein just looks at him and just goes, what a totally intellectually bankrupt argument. You're telling us that we can't even think about creative design as a intellectual discussion and as a theory for how we got here. Well, no, we can't do that. But it's okay for you to tell us that somehow billions of years ago in a galaxy far away, life existed and it blew up. And it's just the most absurd statement I've ever heard in my life. Here's this guy that's supposed to be this, this great thinker, and he hasn't thought it through. It's such an intellectually bankrupt argument. So,
well, yeah,
of course,
the fact that Mars would have life wouldn't automatically suggest panspermia. It simply suggests that God's creation, and this is not surprising to those who really read the book of Genesis in the Bible, is varied, is extremely, common and prevalent, and that doesn't, just because they find biological life forms or evidence of past life forms on Mars, doesn't automatically suggest panspermia. However, that is the twisting that they're going to use, to forward this argument.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely think they will. It seems to be coming, like you mentioned. It's definitely more user friendly, in the sense that when you get guys like Edgar Mitchell coming out of the woodwork now, telling us that Roswell was an event that had happened, that he grew up in the town of Roswell, New Mexico. When you Google him on YouTube, it's really interesting to watch the interview that he does, and the audio of the interview from Kerrang Radio, and then later on, where he's talking and he's being filmed. And he's saying, look, I was on the moon and I did this and I got back here, and a lot of people that had remained silent for decades in Roswell approached me with their story, how they had been threatened by the military. I mean, it's all the stuff we've all heard before. Threatened by the military, told to shut up, told not to say anything, said that you didn't see what you thought you saw. And their families were threatened, and on and on it goes. I was just on a radio show, and the host just reamed Mitchell. I mean, up one end and down the other. Just cut this guy apart, calling him a boob, and because he's got the Noetic Science Institute and all this, and why? Because he's interested in trying to find out where his origins are. And for this, he's castigated. In other words, well, he's got a book to sell at $65 a pop. I mean, that's all this. It's just amazing how the first thing that happens.
And it's not just Edward, and it's not just Mitchell. It's Gordon Cooper in his book Leap of Faith.
Other people, right?
Amazing. And he describes
other people have talked about this.
Yeah, he describes craft at Edwards Air Force Base taken via high-speed camera when he was a test pilot. And
look, there were 4 guys on Larry King several weeks back that talked about the same thing. That they had worked during the Cold War and the intercontinental ballistic missile silos in the Midwest and other places in the United States, and all 4 of these guys talked about this UFO coming in and shutting the base down. In other words, shutting a portion of that base down. And apparently 10 intercontinental ballistic missiles went offline. So the lights went from green, ready to launch, to red. And they had a tech on there. This guy probably worked there at least 10 years, if not longer. And he went on the record and said, look, one of these things would go offline. Very, very rarely you'd see 2, never 10. And, these people saw this UFO, was tracked on radar. These guys are on Larry King breaking security clearances, or are they breaking security clearances? In other words, are they being given the okay by higher-ups or whatever? Look, we want to break, here's a scenario. I'm not saying this is what's going on, but it's a scenario. At least we can travel in it. It's like if you can't talk about it like in this sort of terms, then there's no freedom of speech. And on this radio show I was on fairly recently, I mean, there was no freedom of speech. The host had made up his mind. If you don't agree with him, you're an idiot. That's basically the way he couched everything. And of course, I will probably never be on his program again, which is fine. But getting back on point, here's a scenario. Mitchell's been known about this stuff. He's been traveling in this stuff. He's, got his Noetic Institute, and he's got his books and everything else. He gets a call 9:30 in the morning from a gentleman that he knows that's in the government, let's say. Mr. Mitchell, how are you? They talk, they exchange a few niceties on the phone. Then the man says, we're really concerning the Roswell incident, and you know what I'm talking about, Dr. Mitchell. And Mitchell says, of course I do. And he goes, well, we've been discussing it here, and we're beginning to let some of the information out now because we feel it's time for full disclosure for the citizenry, and we want to start bringing the information out, in little bits and pieces. So I want you to go, and the next interview that you do or whatever, you can feel free to start to, disseminate the information. That's a scenario. Did it happen? No idea. Whether it did or it didn't. But the bottom line is, all of a sudden, after decades of silence, Mitchell hops on Kerrang Radio. You can hear the host when you go on. The host is absolutely flabbergasted. In fact, at some point he's thinking this must be a ruse. Mitchell's probably just pulling my leg here. And he says, is this some sort of an astronaut humor or astronaut joke? And Mitchell just remains very deadpan and says, no. I was there. This stuff is real, and they're here. They look like the little, UFO gray aliens that have been so enculturated throughout movies and E.T. and books and Roswell incidents and all that. So the guy on Kerrang was just blown away. By the way, I've been on Kerrang radio and had a very interesting discussion with politics, prophecy, and the supernatural. But getting back on point again, yes, I think this is all part of what is coming down, the fact that the media is becoming more open to it. This last thing with Mitchell, it was on Fox News. Hannity's America had a typical 10-minute segment, or whatever he does. He's got like an hour, so he carves things up into like 5 to 8 minute segments, whatever. And so Mitchell was on for one of those segments, and he stated it for the last in his program, knowing that probably he would get the most viewers wanting to see that. And this is not an audio from Kerrang. This is a one-on-one interview, fascinating interview with Sean Hannity. And so here it is. It's on Fox News. And with all due credit, you can compare Hannity's demeanor and attitude towards Dr. Mitchell, and this post that I was on a radio was basically just hostile. And Hannity was just like very matter of fact, and this is interesting, and are we looking at this? And let's at least get a dialogue. Whether this other host was literally hostile towards it, and certainly painted basically called it, my argument for it was held together by silly putty. So it's his show. What am I going to do? So, but it's interesting to see how, and this is something I just blogged about a few days ago. Truth goes through 3 phases before it's accepted, and that's when a new concept, like in Christopher Columbus's day. Imagine when Columbus goes, I think the world might be round. Imagine the absolute ridicule and the names that he was called, scoffed at, called an idiot. The ridicule, how he was castigated, one side down the other probably. But he finally, and that's the first stage of when a new truth begins to emerge. The second stage, of course, is a violent opposition to it. And I would say that the host I was on with was definitely in the first stage, moving into the second. He definitely was into the idea of ridiculing me and anyone who would believe Dr. Mitchell, but he was also sort of vituperative with his remarks and kind of getting hostile in his attitude to the point where I don't want to be on his show anymore. And of course, the third phase that truth goes through is self-evident. Well, we always knew it was here. It's widely accepted, and it just becomes self-evident. Well, it's always been that way. The world has always been round. When are you talking about the world is flat, which is what we see now? And yet, a few centuries ago, the world was flat, and that's how everyone viewed it. So all that to say, I believe that when this so-called revealing of the extraterrestrial presence happens, which I think literally is sooner than later, which I believe, of course, is the subtitle of my book, There Are the Dogs, The Coming Great Deception of the Luciferian Endgame, the churches will be mostly deceived. Most lukewarm Christians will be deceived. Certainly, if you have no idea of what this is, you will be deceived. And you will believe that in the alien gospel, which is simply this, that they are progenitors, they created us and genetically manipulated us thousands of years ago from primitive man, that they also started off the world's religions. I blog on this, by the way, on the blog. You have to go back. I think it's one of the first blogs, Indiana Jones and the Crystal Skulls. That was the headline of it. Entertainment or propaganda. Of course, I believe it's propaganda. And, all of this is working towards an end. And one would have to say that Mr. Marzulli, do you believe in conspiracies? I say, well, they're sure. I mean, people can have conspiracies. Was JFK a conspiracy? In my opinion, it was. But that's a whole other topic of conversation. But there's a mystery of iniquity, as Paul talks about it in the Word, in the Bible. When Paul talks about it, that this mystery of iniquity is at work and already at work. And he talks about that in the letter to Thessalonica, the Thessalonians, saying that this mystery is at work. It's in the world. It's working. It's moving, and
it's about 8 years old. I saw a UFO. It was during in the 1970s. It was during one of the big flaps. It was actually the same flap that occurred right when we were standing up our nuclear level during the 1973 war. There was a huge UFO flap then, and I actually saw one. And I didn't know what to make of it. And for many years, it changed my worldview. It really affected me to the negative. I well, is God real? And it's only when I began actually reading the Bible and I began seeing that it was described in the Bible, this deception, and understanding that angels aren't little, things that you see in a Christmas play. These are real, actual beings.
Right.
I think that there'll be people who will realize that. I think you're very popular on Coast to Coast, and there's a reason for that. One, I think the Holy Spirit is affecting people. So we're saying these words. It's not just us that's saying these words and saying this message. This is a message that's going out from God, I believe, and He wants people to wake up about this deception. He doesn't want these angels, these fallen angels that, by the way, He created, to deceive everyone. There's going to be a believing remnant that will exist, and I believe that even during this confusion, that God's Spirit will make it apparent to people that what they're seeing on TV, what they're reading in the newspapers, what people are telling them around the water cooler, with the intense fear that's wrapped around in that there is a truth, that there is a grounding. It is in the Bible. It is a safe place to go. It is a safe place to turn to. Christ is real. He's not accidental.
Right.
There's a lot of preachers out there that are fake. I'm like you, Lynn. I see the church and I see these TV evangelists, and I'm absolutely turned off. However, there are people that are truly with God, that honestly believe in Jesus, that are following His way, and the way is the key. It's not a church, it's the way. It's the way it's described in the early church.
Correct.
And that they don't have to pay attention to all this enculturated churchianity, that this is a real thing. It helps people. And it also explains down to the absolute letter and degree the things that are going to be coming on this earth. And there are things coming on this earth that are going to challenge, that will look like a movie. People will not believe what they will be seeing, in my opinion.
I believe that.
We all were there, just like you mentioned in 9/11, and we saw on television the collapsing of these buildings, and we all went, that looks like a movie. I mean, that's probably one of the first things that came to my mind when I saw that. And when we see these mushroom clouds, and then we see manifestations in the heavens of craft, people are not going to believe it. They're going to be blown away. They're going to be frozen. Like a computer freezes, they will freeze. So I think that now is the time to begin thinking about these things, whatever you believe in. Even if you question what we're saying here, you should think about them and consider, what do you believe, if this happens.
Let me piggyback on that, in the same idea that Scripture, specifically the Book of Revelation, gives us a scenario which talks about a one-world government and a one-world religious system. And I love some of these prophecy guys get up there and go, well, the Antichrist is going to have this one-world religion and we're all going to worship him. Okay, fine. But they never tell you how they're going to get there.
Yeah.
In other words, no one has a clue as to how they're going to get there. Well, in politics, prophecy, and the supernatural, one of the things that I do discuss is that this event, my scenario, has a reason, and I give a scenario in which the 1.2 billion Muslims on this planet and the 1.6 billion Christians on this planet would surrender their belief system because they would see something that would overwhelm them, not only supernaturally, but when they start showing holographic film of Jesus walking on the water and everything else, the church is going to be blindsided. And this is what people let it go. This is the coming great deception. This is the alien gospel. This is the Luciferian endgame. Those titles I've used. This is the great deception, which is coming. And people will be deceived. Jesus himself says it. Men fainting from fear of what is coming upon the earth. Even the elect would be deceived if that were possible. Satan comes with all signs and lying wonders. Add them all up, folks. Don't take my word for it. You look in your Bible and you tell me, come up with a scenario. How do you get 1.2 billion Muslims to change their religion? How are you going to do that? You're going to shoot them all? Under the pain of death? Baloney. They'll already die. So that's not going to work, is it? They're not going to change. You're going to have to shatter their worldview. And one way to do that would be to have holographic film showing the angel coming out of a craft and going into the cave and talking to Muhammad. One way to blow the Christians away would be on the day of the resurrection, right? There, E.T. comes down, stone rolls away, there's a bunch of graves there, and Jesus knows them because Jesus is actually a plant. He's a walk, and he's part of the extraterrestrial hierarchy, whatever, however you want to say it. And I know it sounds incredibly far-fetched, but it's a scenario, isn't it? And the other, as far as I know, no one else has come up with a scenario. All these prophecy scholars, no one's come up with another scenario. Well, the Antichrist is going to kill everybody. Well, I just said several paragraphs before that the Muslims are willing to die for their faith, so that's not going to work. It's just not going to work. Now, I believe that in Jesus' words, when he says, men fainting from fear of what is coming on the earth, that even the elect would be deceived. What is coming is so supernaturally monumental. We've never seen anything like it. Remember, the book of Revelation also talks about when Satan is cast down on the earth, he's really ticked off because he knows his time is short. For the first time, he's stuck in the space-time continuum that we are stuck in. So he can't flit in and out interdimensionally like he's been able to do. Now he's stuck here, and he's really ticked off because of it.
Yeah, that's interesting, and some people ask me, well, if the evil angels have craft, why do they have craft? One, and I think that's a good answer. One is that there could very well be a limitation that the fallen angels have now. They were cast out of heaven. It very clearly says that in the Bible. The second thing is there seems to be some kind of biological connection. It mentions in Genesis 3, the seed of the serpent, and there's a lot of different interpretations of that, but I take it as a literal biological line from the line of for the and then we have other imagery in the Bible that describes the mixing of clay and the seed of man,
clay and iron, right?
Clay and iron, right? And exactly in the statue. So it's clear that there's biological entities associated with these fallen angels. So when people see extraterrestrials, I firmly believe that there very well may be extraterrestrial biological entities. But people have to realize that they are likely genetic manipulations of the fallen angels somehow. They are, it's no accident why these beings are harvesting apparently human female eggs during the abduction. I know people make a lot of fun of that, but serious scientists and sociologists and psychologists have studied it and found that there's something to this. So what is true, in my opinion, is that God doesn't necessarily need these craft, and that's one of the division, I think, with a lot of people is that, well, if the bad guys have UFOs, then the good angels must have UFOs, and it may be, but I don't think that that's necessarily true. In other words, people will say, well, Jesus will come down in a spacecraft, and all the miracles that Jesus did in the Bible were because he was assisted by angels and UFOs. To me, that's just a lie of the enemy, in my opinion.
Agree.
So, that's another thing that tends to be showing up, and I did want to make it clear on from Dry Wind standpoint, and I know your standpoint too, that it is a little bit of a different view than some in this field who talk about the subject. That I think we're pretty clear on the fact that God is not going to come down in a UFO.
Yeah, I mean, there's no way. And if you see anybody, I got an email from someone today, and she signs it. She signs all her posts. God does not need UFOs. That whole deal. Jesus does not need a UFO. And and I agree. It's like, see, the thing that cracks me up about the church at large, with all due respect to my Christian brethren, and here's a couple of things. My book was banned at the last church I was at, which was one of the reasons why I left it. I mean, without reading it, it's just automatically censored. Well, what kind of nonsense is that? Is this the Middle Ages? Is this the Middle Ages I'm in? I mean, the Pope?
Is that because it mentioned the word UFO, or there? I mean,
it's just the whole concept. The whole he never read it. The pastor never read it, but he censored it. Wasn't allowed to be sold at the bookstore. And I took great umbrage with that. I said, you haven't even read this thing. He said, well, other people have read it, and they've told me what it says. And I said, well, let's walk through it point by point.
Yeah.
What do you disagree with? Well, I don't have time to read it, but I'm going to censor it. I just unbelievable, I mean, how intellectually dishonest is that, and how can you possibly follow and serve under someone with that type of a mindset? I know I can't. That was the straw that broke the camel's back for me. I mean, that was it. It was over. See ya. And time to move on. But I had a thought I was going to kind of mention and kind of get into with the whole idea of the church, and with all due respect to my Christian brethren, it's like there's this saying, well, if it's not in the Bible, I'm just I'm not going to travel in it. I'm not going to think about it. I'm not going to, it's like, if this is unexplained here, so I'm not going to really, and I respect that. I understand that. It's like let's err to the side of like, let's not make false doctrine or add things that aren't there. I agree.
Sure.
Okay, that being said, when you look at Daniel says a prayer. A few weeks later, the angel shows up and says, hey, Dan, guess what? I tried to get here, but I was withstood by the Prince of Persia, who held me back, and I couldn't get here. So I had to go get reinforcements. Now, when we travel in that, and these are the questions that come up in my mind. Well, reinforcements, that means more. Does that mean just one other angel, or does that mean more than angel? How did they fight? How was he restrained? Flaming swords like the cherubim at the Garden of Eden? Don't know. I find that of great interest. I can run with that and speculate it. I'm certainly not going to make a doctrine over it, and I'm certainly not going to say this is what you must believe. I find it incredibly fascinating, though, that the Prince of Persia withstood that angel, and he had to go back and get help and reinforcements, and then he finally broke through. Unflippin' believable. And we're given this scene into the heavenlies, just like Ezekiel, where we see, we get this heavenly scene, or Isaiah. Heavenly scene, and the angel comes over, takes a coal from the altar in front of Yahweh, and touches it to Isaiah. Woe, I'm a man of unclean lips. I mean, just unbelievable scenes that we see. So the idea is this: that at some point in time, we know that the fallen angels were able to manifest, certainly before the flood. They were able to do that, and that first incursion, in my opinion, was the strongest. Which is why, in my opinion, the Nephilim at that point of time could have been between 20 and 30 feet tall. Not the giants like Goliath, which people go between 9 and 15 feet tall. First incursion was really strong. Besides, their wings were not clipped, if you get my drift. They could still manifest at will from this dimension to the other dimension. Something happened after the flood. I believe that some of the angels literally could no longer flit about the universe, as it were. They couldn't just manifest. And of course the bodies from the so-called Nephilim, in my opinion, became the demons which inhabit around the earth. So fallen angels are different than demons. Demons are the disembodied spirits of the Nephilim or the Nephilim. Fallen angels are fallen angels. So Satan, in my opinion, is a super scientist. This guy's been around for who knows how long, and so he builds the craft in order to get the angels, the fallen angels, who no longer can manifest, really, just on a whim. He builds this craft and enables his minions to manifest. Plus, at the same time, he's strategizing for the coming great deception. So it's really a twofer. Now, that's not to say that all fallen angels have their wings clipped. I don't believe that either. I'm not sure how it works and where it's really going. I don't have all the answers. I'm not saying I do, but I find it's a very interesting scenario, and certainly one that's a workable thesis, a workable theory here, to at least get some dialogue and pull it and push it and see where it goes.
Right, and it is interesting how this manifestation waxes and wanes. It'll go through periods and it'll slow down. We're clearly in a period where it's been on the upswing, and in my opinion, it's been on the upswing since Israel came back into the land.
Oh,
And certainly also we have the Holocaust into the land. And certainly also we have the Holocaust, and you described this, I think, as good as anyone has ever described it.
Thank you, appreciate that.
How the Jews being offered on in our opinion, a satanic altar. Somehow these beings use that to manifest. Human sacrifice, animal sacrifice has some kind of multidimensional or physical manifestation with these things. And this great upspike during World War II with the Foo Fighters, and then certainly after World War II, it's interesting. So the fact of the matter is this stuff is on an upswing, and you can choose to ignore it, but it's not going to go away. And so you can put your head in the sand and say, well, it's all silly. And I know some Christian researchers says, well, these things are all. I've heard the term residual UFO flown around. Well, they're spiritual, and I would agree, they are spiritual. But I think you need to understand the way that the Bible describes the spiritual world as a very physical existence. And when these things manifest in our physical space and time, they have flesh and blood. They're physical. They're in craft. They're able to walk upon the planet just as the good angels, when they appeared in the Bible, walked and prepared food and sat down with Abraham and all the different the scenes that you see in the Bible. So a lot of it, I think, is the way that there's a misunderstanding about what the spiritual world is. And it's a very unbiblical way of understanding the spiritual world. It's actually a kind of a Gnostic way of understanding the spiritual world, that there's this physical world and there's this other beautiful, wonderful existence. It's a continuum of existence. And we're not privy to the spiritual world normally. But I think that as things happen, the barrier between the spiritual world and our physical existence is breaking down. People are becoming fascinated with the occult. I've seen it since I've been alive. I watched it rise in the 70s and the 80s, and now it's just accepted as norm. It used to be kind of on the fringe. Now they talk about occultism and Wicca and all of that as a norm. And I think people need to realize when they practice this, they're opening up doors. But the UK is a hotbed of this stuff.
Yeah, it is.
And it is no accident that these manifestations are happening in the United Kingdom all over the place. It's on the mainstream news in the UK nearly every day. And these are things that are the Ministry of Defense is chasing after. Police, helicopters, and military aircraft are chasing after these things. And I think that's a beginning, and I don't know what the timing is, but the beginning of something that will eventually happen worldwide.
Well, I'm on board with you. This is some statistics. I've also, if you go to the blog and you go a few back, you can. There's a link to the site. It's National UFO Reporting Center, and it's by month, but it's also by year. And basically, in 1947, they had one UFO report. All right. Well, in 2008, last month, there were 375 UFO reports in 1 month. So this goes back to what your statement was, that since the birth of Israel, the phenomenon is burgeoning, and it is. It's burgeoning like crazy. It's not going away. It's accelerating. That's the word I like to use. Everything is an acceleration. Not only the UFO thing, but the enemy is a master strategist, and we can see that in other areas. For instance, and I'm not blaming this all on the enemy, but I find it very curious that I think the last time I was on, we talked about this, that natural disasters are up 400% in the last 2 decades. And I spoke to a meteorologist about this, and he said, absolutely. There's no doubt that this thing is, the frequency of the increase is unbelievable, that the 400% is right. I mean, if it was like 50% or something, we'd kind of scratch our heads and go, well, maybe it's a climatic anomaly or something, sunspots or whatever. But 400% in 2 decades, it's my term. He wouldn't go on board with the acceleration. But I think that the world is accelerating. When you look at the financial markets collapsing all around us, and the way the dollar has fallen, the price of oil, all the other natural disasters. When you look at 14 million people facing starvation in Africa, the AIDS epidemic is up globally. It's becoming a pandemic. I mean, the place is just is a Looney Tune, in my opinion, and people are getting edgy. They're not sure where it's going. Funny, I watched the movie Zeitgeist the other day, and it's not for the faint of heart, for sure, and it's definitely an out there movie. And my caveat is, get a good dose of the word before you watch it, because they'll make you think. They'll make you think, especially the first third, which negates even Jesus as the Messiah. But what I found interesting, and all things biblical, by the way, what I found very, very interesting is that they come to the same conclusions that I come to in certain areas. For instance, they believe that the one world government is imminent, and they also believe that there will be a one world, some sort of monetary system, probably based on digital angel, like I do also, or Verichip, or however it comes down. Now they've got an RFID in the ink, which so they can tattoo you with the ink, and it's, they got the RFID information right there. So it's even gone in the last 6 months from digital angel, now it's into an ink, which they can tattoo on you. Unbelievable. So Zeitgeist looks at this and talks about this and points to the horrors of this one world governmental system, with this big conspiracy, this global conspiracy, which is imminent, which is going to happen soon. Well, in my opinion, once again, they're being incredibly intellectually dishonest because they negate the Bible. And we've been saying this. We've been talking about this since Hal Lindsey, since the late 70s or whenever the late great Planet Earth came out. We've been talking about this for decades. The mark of the beast is going to come, and been laughed at and been scoffed at. So why Zeitgeist and the producers of Zeitgeist throw away the Bible and Jesus and everything else? What they're promulgating towards the end of the film anyway is the same idea that we are, that this global government is going to happen, but they're pulling rabbits out of their hat, where we have this thousands of year old prophetic word which is telling us exactly how it's going to come down, who's behind it, the machinations of Satan. Obviously it's a Luciferic endgame, it's a coming great deception, and it's all part of this fulfillment of the book of Revelation, which, by the way, has been a closed book until fairly recently. I mean, no one understood it. No one had an idea of how this was going to come down. If you went to someone in the early part of the 1900s and say, I believe that Israel is going to be regathered from the four corners of the earth and reestablished in Jerusalem, you would have been ridiculed. Here we go, the three phases of truth. You would have been scoffed at and ridiculed till the cows came home. I mean, it's just, there's no way it's going to happen. And yet, of course, now we see the fulfillment of Ezekiel 37, where Israel truly has been regathered from the four corners of the earth, set back into its ancient homeland. And if you go to Amos 9, it says very specifically, once that happens, it will never again be uprooted from its ancient homeland. So these are the things that are happening in our generation. Literally, we're watching them, we're seeing them happen. And of course, as you pointed out, that from the inception of Israel in 1948, we've seen the rise, the burgeoning of the UFO sightings, and that's exactly what has gone down. That's exactly what we're looking at. So I believe that we are in the time of the end. I believe it's going to happen soon. I think that maybe things will happen a lot sooner than we think. I'm not a date setter, but the way things are heating up, and let me just throw something in here. The Israelis are known for preemptive strikes. It's before the '67 war, they hit the Egyptian airfield. They hit Saddam when he had his nascent nuclear program happening in Iraq long before he was deposed. Recently, they went into Syria, and they also did a preemptive strike there when the Syrians were attempting their nascent nuclear program. The Iranians aren't stupid. Several months ago, I think about a month and a half, 2 months ago, the Israelis did sort of a dry run by going up to Greece. They refueled helicopters. They had F-16s, F-15s, over 100 of them in the air. It was a huge military exercise, basically war games. That's the word I was searching for, war games. And make no mistake about it, Greece is the same distance from Israel as Iran is. So it's very obvious that they're preparing for something. So the Iranians know that. They're not dummies. They're not stupid. They know that the Israelis have a record of this. So if you're over in Iran and you're part of them and their military intelligence, two things have happened. One, fairly recently in Lebanon, the Iranian intelligence officers have occupied the highest peak, which gives them a look over the Mediterranean, where the Sixth Fleet is, I believe, and also the Israelis. So they can see it. They've got eyes on the ground, boots on the ground, intelligence on the ground. Gee, it sounds like they're getting ready for something. They also did these missile tests where they shot up a missile that and it reached a height of 200 miles. Here's what some people have been saying. The whole idea of an electromagnetic pulse wave, and this is the scenario, which, by the way, ties into my book, Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural, where it will be a two-prong attack against Israel. In other words, you could take this missile, arm it with a nuclear warhead, which they easily could get from the Russians, right? Stick it on a barge and fly or move that barge about 100 miles off the coast of the United States, right? Launch the missile, and have it detonate over Ohio. Well, you've over about 200 miles up in the atmosphere. The moment you do that, you're going to set up an electromagnetic pulse wave, which could wipe out our way of life as we know it, literally. At the same time you're doing that, you hit the Israelis. Two-prong attack, like I've been saying in Politics, Prophecy, and the Supernatural. I believe the Iranians are going to pull the plug because they know for a fact that the Israelis will not allow them to get a bomb. And my critics just say, well, Israel has a bomb. Yeah, but Israel's not running around going, Iran is a dry, withered tree, soon to be uprooted and thrown into the sea. Or Iran is a cancer, soon to be irradiated, or, basically we're going to wipe you out. And that's what the Iranians have been saber-rattling for literally years now towards the Israelis. So there's no way the Israelis are going to allow the Iranians to get the bomb. All that, what I just said to say, that I believe the stage is set for this two-prong attack that will happen in the United States and in Israel simultaneously, which will then trigger the supernatural.
Well, I think we're going to be on again discussing this. I'd like to continue this as a continuing dialogue. I think that as people see stuff in the news, I think that they are going to want to listen to this, and maybe even if they disagree with us, at least get our perspective on it. Lynn, thank you very much.
My pleasure, Darrell. Thanks for having me on.
Ladies and gentlemen, again, you can go to spiraloflife.com and get all the information, and we'll see you next time.